Great.
Thanks for being here, Rep Wood.
Thanks, Matt. And I appreciate the kind words you said about 1313 and 1304 and Smart Stair. It's been an honor to do this work and get real housing reform passed in Colorado. And it's especially an honor to work with Rep. Basenecker, who is such an affordable housing champion. Getting to work hand in hand with him on a lot of these bills. They're never easy, but they're highly rewarding, especially when you get them across the finish line. He's being very gracious and letting me go first. I am 24 hours removed from a little heart procedure, and so I'm just a little tired right now. So if I don't come off my usual super energetic self, blame the old ticker. But that's where we're at. So thank you very much, Rep. Basenecker, for letting me go first and then get back to my recovery. I want to talk about two bills tonight. I am on lot splitting with Rep. Basenecker as well this session. We're very excited about that. Um, but the two that I'm going to talk about are land value taxation and transit and housing investment zones. So the first, land value taxation, this is a really exciting concept that my office was able to raise a couple sessions ago during special session. There was some discussion on it. It didn't actually go very far, but it did pique the governor's interest, and now we have his office on board, which is, pretty exciting stuff because we do think that we're going to see some action on it. What we're trying to do is it's sort of a baby step towards land value tax, with the idea being to increase property tax incentives away from land speculation and towards density. Economists from Milton Friedman to Paul Krugman all agree that a tax on land is one of the most efficient and least distortionary taxes. While a full move to LTV isn't really politically feasible right now, and it would probably require a vote of voters or at least municipality by municipality, what we can do is we can get a start by letting local governments and districts split their mill levies between land and improvements, improvements obviously being buildings. All we're proposing to do is allow councils or boards of municipalities, counties, certain types of special districts to vote to split their mill levies. Um, Meaning that the mill levy on land could be set at a different rate than the mill levy on improvements. And right now, they're not able to do that. As long as the change is at least revenue neutral, this would give locals the ability to start taxing buildings at lower rates and start taxing land at higher rates. This is an anti-blight proposal. Anyone who spent a lot of time in Denver has seen a number of surface level parking lots. Part of the reason is our taxation structure, and we're hoping to address that. We don't expect all or even a large number of locals to jump in at first, but this will at least give them the option of better aligning their incentives. Eventually, we hope it reduces the cost of development, reduces blight, and makes downtown parking lots and other land speculation more expensive, while reducing tax bills for most homeowners. We had a meeting with the assessors, and some of the pushback was there are some folks who might see an increase in their taxes because a lot of their value comes from, I'm in Wash Park, right? And a lot of the value comes from land itself. But the studies that we've actually done citywide show that most people would see a tax decrease. While many assessors would have to update some of their systems, the good news is that they already list land and improvement values separately on property tax bills. It's not methodologically difficult to start valuing land and improvements separately. One method is just by using vacant land comps as they normally do. And again, some research shows that land valuation can actually be done more accurately than total property valuation. We always get asked who else has done this. Land value tax is currently the law in 16 cities in Pennsylvania, Singapore, Hong Kong, Denmark, and get this, Estonia, and many other jurisdictions around the world. It would not apply to school districts or most special district mills, nor are we allowing land value tax for agriculture, oil and gas, and mining properties. Um, People get a little shy when we talk about land value taxation as a concept. So we are working on the messaging, much like last session, Rep. Basenecker was instrumental in turning single stair into smart stair. Sometimes the wording matters. We think maybe building exemption or land value capture might be a better sell than land value tax, but that's the direction we're heading in there. Um, The second bill I wanted to talk to you all about tonight is a bill that I'm running with Speaker McCluskey. Really excited about this. This is transit, housing, and investment zones. We've heard from local and regional partners around the state that multimodal infrastructure is critical to ensuring Coloradans can safely and easily catch a bus or train. We know that we have some amount of transit in the state, certainly not enough, and it's certainly not necessarily reliable enough. Um, but one of the big issues people face is actually getting to and from that first mile, last mile connector. Through new innovative financing options using state resources, we hope to make it easier for local and regional governments to provide that needed infrastructure for transit stations and mobility hubs that support new housing and ridership. What we would do is two pieces. The first is tax increment financing, or TIF. We would use only the 2.9% state sales tax around designated transit and housing investment zones across the state for a period not to exceed 25 years. The zones would be up to 1 mile around current and future mobility hubs, transfer stations, park and rides, transit stations, rail stations, and similar hubs. I had the honor, Matt, you spoke so kindly about 1313. I had the honor of carrying that. Unlike 1313, this would be areas across the entire state, not just by the TOCs. Local governments, in partnership with transit agencies in each zone, would be able to submit applications to fund transit-related infrastructure like first and last mile connections, safety improvements, wayfinding, and placemaking amenities to be financed by the annual incremental state sales tax revenues in that zone. The TIF area boundaries must be within 1 mile of transit and housing investment zones around stations and will be designated by local governments to be approved by a statewide board appointed by both the governor and the General Assembly affiliated with OEDIT. The statewide board would ultimately approve TIF applications. We're thinking about 2 or 3 apps would probably get approved a year. Um, it's partly modeled on the Regional Tourism Act, the only other time the state government has used TIF. No local portion of sales tax or property tax would be affected through this, although it could be used, as a top layer to lay over this, to lay on top of these projects. Applications would probably be open in 2027, with the first distributions occurring in 28 or 29. And the sales tax increment is expected to grow slowly, meaning that in the early years, most of the state revenue would be used by the tax credits, which is the second part. We would have a new state income tax credit administered by CHAFA for taxpayers to develop housing within certain affordability ranges in transit and housing development zones. The zones would be up to 1 mile around current and future mobility hubs, like before. Again, unlike 1313, they would be areas across the state. It'd be modeled as much as possible on the state affordable housing tax credit, low income housing tax credit. That's our LIHTC, or the middle income housing tax credit. However, affordability requirements can be more flexible than LIHTC since housing around rail and transit stops tends to be more expensive, and the tax credit awards would begin in 2027. Um, it, Examples of potential investment in housing investment zones: RTD facilities and other similar transfer stations, park and rides and mobility hubs, CDOT mobility hubs, front range passenger rail district stations, and mountain rail stations. I'm really excited to run it with the speaker. It is my pre-file, but we just got an extension on it because it's at 60 pages and we're still doing a lot of stakeholding. Really excited about both of these. I'm also excited to be on, like I said, lot splitting with Rep. Basenecker, also looking at minimum lot sizes, that reform with Rep. Rebecca Stewart, and also affordability, special districts. So a special district allowance for affordable housing. But these are the two bills that I'm highlighting tonight. Happy to take questions.
There is one in the comments about how transit hubs will be defined. Is that going to be bus lines by frequency of the current lines? You said current and future. How do you define the transit hub?
Yeah, so it's 1 mile. It's more geographic than in terms of frequency. I can get you a more full answer, Kevin. But the idea is to give local governments as much flexibility as they can, and it would probably be a feedback loop, because you can increase the frequency of ridership, uh, the better the infrastructure is. But let me get you a more complete answer on that.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You got it.
Other questions about these wonky financial topics? I have one. The state is broke, from what I understand. How can we give up a future revenue stream if the budget's already out of balance?
Well, the idea is that we're using the incremental increase in the state sales tax. And so, one question is how are we going to, allocate our future spending? And putting it towards affordable housing makes a lot of sense, especially because when people can get to and from its places easier, it spurs economic activity, more sales tax. So it's actually one of the smartest ways we can be spending our money right now in terms of ROI.
Thank you, love it. Megan Overton asks, will the new proposed tax credit affect the allocations for existing state affordable housing tax credits?
My understanding is no, but Megan, I can get you a more comprehensive answer on that. Again, we're looking at the incremental increase, and not impacting existing state affordable housing tax credits.
Other questions?
Give me 1 second. I got to grab something out of the oven.
Okay. Peter, you could just come off mute and say hello.
Hi everyone. Um, yeah, I yeah, maybe I'll wait till Rep Woodrow gets back.
And I'm actually with Rep Woodrow on the land value tax. If it's a land value tax question, I can probably take that.
I had another question about the second item.
And I can't help you with that. So just in time, Stephen is back.
Thanks, Senator.
I was kind of curious if just if I understood this correctly. So the idea is the the increase in state sales tax revenue that is generated by development along a transit line or in a transit hub could be reinvested in the community through improved transit and affordable housing. Is that more or less how it works?
Yes, is my understanding. And again, the big piece is, when we talk to local governments about this, they're like, you're not taking our local sales tax, are you? And the answer is
Right.
only state sales, and it's only supposed to be incremental. Um, Hence the TIF aspect of it. And it's that 2.9% state sales tax that we have right now.
When you talk to cities, I'm always kind of curious. I'm also here in Fort Collins, like about the scale of that. Like how big the size of the pot of money depends on all kinds of factors, right? How big the district is, how much sales are generated in that district, whether it's a commercial zone. But do you have do you have a kind of image that you use to describe the scale of what that pot of money might look like?
Yeah, I don't have an exact dollar figure, Peter. What I can tell you is that unlike most of the housing bills that Rep. Basenecker and I run, cities and counties and municipalities are very excited about this one. Usually it's us coming along
It's state money, yeah. Mm-hmm.
and not only that, it's not a mandate. It's not an unfunded mandate. It's not top down. You have to do this rezoning. You have to change your building codes. You need to do X, Y, and Z. It's here's some tools, here's some money to actually connect people to transit. So on this one, fortunately, all the feedback we've gotten so far has been exceedingly positive. Thank you for this. Is there any way we can expand it and get more money? Because we want to connect people to ridership. We know that we have to get riders onto our system in order for the system to be successful. That was really the underpinning of 1313 in the transit-oriented communities, is if you don't zone enough density around transit, you're not going to have the ridership because you're not going to have people close enough. And this sort of buttresses that. It supports it by saying, okay, we still understand that if you're a mile away, I'm a mile away from my closest light rail station. It's not easy to get to, and there's no parking by it, right? But if there was bike lanes, if there were scooters, if there was easier sidewalks, safer sidewalks, that would be more helpful. The one kind of curious piece of feedback we've gotten from local governments is, could you just give us the money and let us do what we want with it? sort of free reign to, fix potholes and things like that. And while we understand that there's a desperate need there for that type of infrastructure, my sense is that the awards are going to go to those municipalities that really make the link between here's transit stations and here's how we're going to help get people to them. Like I said, the feedback's been really positive from the Front Range to the Western Slope. We've got mountain communities that are looking at different multimodal solutions. And so we want to be there as the state to finally give them some help and support on that.
Rep Woodrow, I have a question about the land value tax.
Yeah.
So could a city raise the mill levy on land and lower it on improvements without going to a vote of the people?
Still looking into that from a constitutional standpoint. There's the reason why we're trying to make it revenue neutral is to avoid those legal hurdles. So it's not raising taxes,
Right.
just changing the incentive structure.
It would raise taxes for some and lower them for others.
Correct. And so ultimately, it's probably going to be the case that most of this has to go to voters.
Okay.
Or you would see a city council, a county, board of commissioners pass something, and then it would be, a second vote of the voters to approve it.
Okay. Senator Henriksen.
Thanks, Matt. I think too with that, what we're hoping to do as well is combine that, the ability to combine that with a tax reduction elsewhere, and have that be one vote. So, for example, what I would like to see in my dream world in Pueblo, where I represent, is we have really, really high city sales taxes, and it is punitive. And we have very, very low property values, relative to the state, relative actually to the median in the country, which is unique. There's not a lot of places in Colorado like that. What I would like to see is us be able to raise land value taxes and further offset that with a sales tax reduction. I think that would be really important, both from a form of progressive taxation and from a form of strategic incentives for economic development and for housing development that we're talking about here. And to do that without the revenue neutrality portion of that we're trying to achieve legislatively through this bill, you'd have to have two separate referrals or initiatives. You'd have to have one to offset the rates, the levies, that is, on property or on land and improvements, and a second vote simultaneously on the offset of the split mill levy with the reduction of the sales tax. That gets very, very complicated for me to even just say it right here, let alone for the average voter to understand it. It becomes a lot simpler when a local government has the ability to split the mill levy themselves and then go for a single vote on if they wanted to do it tied to sales tax. That's a potentiality if they wanted to do it to other taxation release offset. That would be a tool available to them as well, but only going to the voters a single time.
Awesome. I'm excited to see the bill language. Any other questions before we turn it over to Rep. Basenecker? Yay, take it away. Oh, Rep. Woodrow, are you gone? Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Representative.
Well, thanks, Matthew. Good to see everybody. Really do appreciate the opportunity to chat housing. Always really look forward to checking in with especially our YIMBY folks on these important policies. So thanks, Matthew, for pulling us all together and having a good reason to talk on a Thursday evening. I'm bringing three housing bills this session. I'll start with the HOME Act, which is largely similar to House Bill 1169, which I brought last year, which was known as YIGBY, Yes in God's Backyard. We've made some tweaks to that proposal, mostly in terms of qualifying entities, qualifying properties, but just to level set why these policies are important. It goes without saying, because you hear this all the time, but I think important to state publicly, Colorado lacks over 100,000 homes, and we are the state with the second worst housing deficit in the United States. And in Colorado, only 20% of for sale homes are affordable for a teacher earning a median salary in the district, and half of Colorado renters spend more than 30% of their income on housing. We have seen demonstrable improvements in those numbers where we have been able to bring more supply to bear. Denver Metro and the multifamily market there being a really good example of that. So we know that these policies are working, and we know that where there are underutilized properties and partners who are willing to engage in the difficult work of building affordable housing, we need to provide a predictable and, I think, appropriate pathway to being able to get those things done. So what this bill largely does, the HOME Act, this year's 1169, it'll empower community organizations to develop housing by leveraging existing land and their close connection to community needs by utilizing an administrative review process when they are interested in building affordable housing. So the administrative review process was something that was set into place through the Transit-Oriented Communities Bill, through the Accessory Dwelling Unit Bill that you mentioned earlier. And what we know is that these processes have a good amount of oversight. They check the right boxes in terms of understanding about whether or not housing is feasible in certain areas, but they're also 28% faster. And when you think about what that means in terms of cost savings, predictability, and a capital stack, it is an incredible benefit, I think, to the community overall to say that where we prioritize affordable housing, let's build it at the lowest price point possible and on a predictable pathway. So this bill would unlock land to promote infill growth and ensure Coloradans can live in communities where they work. It expands on those prior bills that you had mentioned earlier by really creating inclusive, affordable, and well-connecting neighborhoods. And it allows local governments to continue to implement local affordable housing requirements wherever they deem necessary. So they can still use tools like deed restrictions, IZ, et cetera. The qualifying properties for this bill and the qualifying entities is maybe a better way to look at that, would be qualifying nonprofits. And we have a list in the bill of sort of like who that would be, but you can largely think about like entities like Habitat for Humanity or others who are already building affordable housing. So the qualifying nonprofit with a history of building affordable housing in the state of Colorado are public housing authorities, public schools, public universities, and our transit agencies as well. And so we recognize that when we enable these organizations to build housing on a predictable pathway, that we are unlocking a significant amount of underutilized land for the dedicated purpose of building more deeply affordable housing for our communities. We also know that partnerships in this space are important, right? So in as much as you might not be one of these entities today, but say you're a nonprofit, but you've never built affordable housing in the state of Colorado, the bill also creates a pathway for a partnership between a qualifying entity and somebody who maybe aspires to be a qualifying entity to be able to do that work together and then unlock that opportunity for a future developer in that space. So Habitat could come alongside an existing nonprofit that perhaps has not built affordable housing to date, enter into a partnership to be able to do that. And then from that point on, you would be able to realize the fact that now we have another nonprofit who has also built affordable housing in the state of Colorado. So it really does unlock a lot of future potential, knowing that this is a space where we desperately need more partners, more investment, more capital, and certainly more predictable processes at the local level. That being said, there are a lot of good reasons why housing shouldn't be built in certain areas. I think that very much dovetails with our state's climate goals as they relate to both transit and housing. So in an area where there's perhaps only a property served by septic and well water, this would be a parcel that would be exempt from the proposal. If a lot is graded really oddly or shaped really oddly, another good reason to perhaps say no or pull that back into a more traditional development review process. So lots of good reasons why still that traditional development review process can exist. But we know that when we have the right conditions, you have the right property, and you have the right partners at the table, the position of local government should largely be to say yes to that housing, barring some unforeseen or extenuating circumstances. So that is the Home Act. I should say as well, it caps the maximum acreage that can be included in a development at 5 acres, because really past that point, it seems like there is need for more conversation about what the footprint would be inside of the community where that development would take place. I'll talk about the next one, which is lot splitting. This one is a little further down the road in terms of introduction order. Home Act is my pre-file bill, so you should see that introduced within the first couple weeks of session. Our goal is to move that hopefully through the process as quickly as possible, knowing that there was good support for 1169 last year. Lot splitting, I'm really thinking of this like accessory dwelling unit 2.0. The goal here is to really increase opportunities for home ownership by removing regulatory barriers and streamlining the ability to subdivide your lot. So there are some good examples out there that other states have already passed and put into law. But we're trying to think of this in a little bit of a different way, because it's really being able to unlock the opportunities that we've already created through the accessory dwelling unit policy, and to make those possibilities home ownership possibilities for folks instead of just rental properties if someone should so desire to do so. So this can also help homeowners stay in their homes and stay in their community, especially where you might be struggling with costs, rising property tax values, by simply selling off a portion of your lot and hopefully securing your long-term financial future in your home at the same time that you're providing a home ownership opportunity for somebody else. You know, at the end of the day, in Colorado, in Fort Collins, for example, a 700 plus square foot accessory dwelling unit will run you, in the mid to low 200s to build. That is not a housing product we are bringing to market at scale in the state of Colorado today. And if we have the opportunity to, one, make it possible for you to administratively split your lot, and then two, create a home ownership opportunity for somebody at a price point that just simply does not exist in the market today, I think we will have really gone a long way towards creating opportunities for folks to have that next generation of wealth through home ownership, which has always been really the American dream. And so I think this is one of the ways we can unlock that promise for future generations, and certainly for communities who have been locked out of the opportunity to have a home ownership for a variety of reasons. You can look at a couple different states, California being one of them. We're really looking closely at Washington State's lot splitting law, which creates certain conditions under which local jurisdictions must approve an administrative lot split. In Washington State, you can do that one time. You create a new lot and the parent lot, and then past that point, you could not subdivide those lots further. So you can't sort of do the Russian nesting doll trick with your property. But it does give you the opportunity to split it once, provided that certain conditions are met. It also does contemplate certain things, Washington State's laws, like minimum lot size reform and minimum density requirements. This is where I would just say that the Housing Coalition and the legislators you have on this call, and certainly in other spaces, and are really working together, because we understand that one policy dovetails and intersects with the next. You heard Rep. Woodrow talk about minimum lot size reform. Obviously, what we need to do here is make sure that it's not just a matter of splitting that lot, but understanding that the size of the split necessarily dictates what could be built on that lot at present, and also looking at where we need to go in terms of those minimum lot sizes to make those home ownership opportunities possible. So a lot more work to do there. We are waiting on a good amount of data and analysis to understand what those numbers should be, if it's a percentage, if it's a minimum square footage, what that looks like. I will say some of the things that are also sort of looming questions for us. They're not unsolvable, but some things that we need to think through are things like what utility siting, access to those new lots, guardrails against investor ownership, and really making sure that we bring alongside our affordable housing friends to understand that, simply by creating the market conditions for a smaller footprint home, we are necessarily creating affordable housing that doesn't exist in our communities today. And so some work to be done there, but I think this will be probably bill number 4 or number 5 in my order. And then the last policy I'll talk about briefly is Proposition 123. incredibly excited about Prop 123 and also recognize that for many communities, the way that the baseline calculations were set in statute have meant that our housing goals for communities are perhaps unattainable unnecessarily so. And I'll use Senator Heinrichson's home community of Pueblo as a good example. The amount of naturally occurring affordable housing in Pueblo skews their baseline target for the amount of housing that Pueblo needs to build to a place that is simply unattainable, even if you have local governments who are doing everything we've asked them to do, a fast track process, whatever it might be. It really is creating a situation where by next year, we think that the majority of folks who have opted into Prop 123 may not make it across the finish line for a future year. And that was never the intent of Prop 123. Because market conditions have changed and some things have changed with the baseline, we recognize that we need to come back to the table, figure out a baseline calculation that is workable, and keep folks enrolled in the program as long as you're making those good faith efforts towards compliance. What would it mean if we didn't? Sure, it could be a 1-year timeout, but when you think about the development life cycle, a 1-year timeout is not a 1-year timeout for housing. It is a multi-year timeout for projects that are perhaps really well underway and just looking for that last piece of investment or process. It also means that developers would be disincentivized from developing in areas that are no longer eligible for Prop 123 funds. I think that's a huge hit to our state, unnecessarily so. So the bill has 3 main goals. The first is to adjust the baseline, likely using building permit data over a certain period of time to recalculate what a reasonable baseline is for jurisdictions, coupled with that jurisdiction's growth factors, right? Are they a jurisdiction that is growing? Are they a jurisdiction that is in decline? Are they just kind of holding steady? Or another way to look at it as well is to say that if the market rate rents are above average for a jurisdiction, perhaps they should have a higher need for, or at least a higher reason to build affordable housing in some of those jurisdictions as well. We're still working through what those calculations might look like, but our initial projections show that if we use building permit data coupled with a variety of factors, we can largely keep a large amount of the folks who are currently enrolled in the program and making good progress enrolled for the next 3 years as well, which would be our goal. We're also looking at ways to better do partnerships between municipalities and county governments, recognizing that unit counts are critical to those programs, and figuring out better ways to recognize when there has been significant investment of resources on one side or the other, so that we're incentivizing those partnerships and building housing where there is, I think, a real reason to look at density as a win-win proposition. The third thing that I would just say is that there's also need to be some sort of waiver process or at least some sort of exemption for jurisdictions that are currently enrolled in the program. And we're still trying to figure out what that might look like so that we don't boot a bunch of people out upon year 3, but that we can really figure out a metric by which to say, you know, this has been a challenging time. Economic conditions have changed. You're making good progress. Here's the new baseline. We'd love for you to consider that for these next 3 years. So some more work to be done on that one. Gary Community Ventures has been a great partner in that space. We've been working diligently with our local governments on that. There is also a Prop 123 bill that will work on the home ownership side of things. That is not this bill. I'm supportive of those efforts, but due to title constraints and also just really trying to narrow in on the baseline conversation, that's the work we're having to do with this title. So Matthew, I'll stop there because I feel like I've talked way too long and appreciate everyone's kindness and patience.
Thank you. A lot to digest. Questions. You can just, I think we got small enough group actually, you can just unmute and ask it or put it in the chat if you don't want to speak.
Representative Snicker, thanks. Thanks for supporting these. For the Home Act, you guys are still trying to figure out, I believe, what the allowable density would be for transit land. I think you realize that maybe it has to be a little different than some of the other land. I'm wondering if you've considered anything like a density bonus so that like RTD could like create denser housing in exchange for affordability.
Yeah, that's a great question, Kevin. It hasn't come up yet. Our initial conversations with RTD have been very positive, but I think it's a good flag to try to figure out what could happen on those unique properties in particular.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, welcome your thoughts too. If you have ideas, send them our way.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Peter.
Hey, Rep Beisnicker.
Hey,
I
Peter.
good to see you. I had two quick questions about the Prop 123 fixes, actually. One was about a kind of budget question, which is that I know, of course, last year the governor's office proposed dipping into the Prop 123 funds to help fix the budget crisis. Um, this might be a hard question to answer, but do you foresee that happening again this year? And I know that it was written into the measure that there was some flexibility there for these funds to be a little bit accessible in times of budget crisis, but we're kind of in perpetual budget crisis at this point. So I was curious how you see those trade-offs and whether there's anything your bill could do to address some of those concerns about keeping those Prop 123 funds in dedicated to affordable housing. The second question I had was actually about the governor's executive order around the cities that are ignoring implementing the new housing laws around ADUs, other things like that. Is that something that could be written into the bill? So to stay eligible for these Prop 123 affordable housing dollars, you have to be in good standing with the state of Colorado in terms of housing law. So just a couple thoughts. Thank you.
No, Peter, those are great questions. I'll start with your second one first. When I use the word phrase good faith compliance on a call with some local governments, I think their mind immediately went to that place, is that were we going to pull in some of those compliance pieces into this bill? I don't know that title will allow us to do that, but I will say I am watching closely, and it is something of continued interest. Obviously, the first goal is compliance, even if it's compliance that you don't like. We want to make sure that local governments have the tools they need, that these measures are administrable, right? Those things are very important. And there are jurisdictions who will tell like publicly, we're going to tell you that we do not appreciate these measures, but by the way, we are in full compliance, right? Like, and that fine, like that is fine. So I don't know is the answer to that, what that looks like. I know that really one of the main and only criteria for Prop 123 compliance in the next year is that fast tracks process, right? And there are some local governments who haven't done that. I mean, in my mind, that is a very low bar to cross. And if you haven't done that in 3 years, that's probably a good indicator that you're not interested in the program, right? The goal was never that 100% of the local governments made it across the finish line. But I think the flip side of that is the goal was never that 90% don't. And so we just need to figure that piece out with a little bit of nuance, recognizing that things have changed significantly since we put those things in the statute. My hope is that we don't have to revisit it next year, that we can figure out a flexible formula that accounts for some of these things, but more to be done. And I appreciate the question about the executive order because it was of interest to me as well. The other question you had related to funding, we were pretty intentional about keeping the funding pieces out of this bill because it gets messy real fast. And I'll just say, personal commitment of mine is that we need more affordable housing funding and we need it yesterday, right? We know that. And at the same time, the current budget situation is incredibly difficult. Funding from one of the water quality measures that I passed to benefit our mobile home park residents was swept as a result of some of the shortfall from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act being passed into law, right? So these conversations are challenging. I think that is a JBC conversation that I'm comfortable having in that space, but we'll continue advocating for that funding to be retained. And I know Gary is tracking that very closely as well.
Other questions? So did I hear correctly that this lot splitting bill may have some minimum lot size reform sprinkled in there once you figure out the numbers?
Well, I think it's going to have to, right? Because you could split a lot in half, but if the half isn't something that's allowable to build on in a certain jurisdiction, you really haven't unlocked anything, so that's where the overlay of data is going to be really helpful. We anticipate having a little more information, I would say next week or the week after. And I think with some of those pieces, and then we're also trying to figure out HOAs, right? Because it gets sticky from a governance standpoint.
Yeah.
And so, I would just say that this bill will not be the end all be all in terms of lot splitting, but what it will hopefully unlock are some home ownership opportunities that don't exist at present. And I hope it's something we can really build on in years future.
I think about our South Transit Hub, which is surrounded by the urban estate zone in Fort Collins, which is minimum lot sizes of 1/2 acre. right in a transit-rich area, job-rich area. I don't know if cities should zone like that. Peter, what do you think?
Can you, I mean, you mentioned the ADU example, which is so telling. I mean, is there a way to write into the bill that if has to be a small home, as you pointed out, I think in Fort Collins, it's a 700 square foot footprint, that you can split it off? Would it be directly attached to ADUs? Is that possible?
Peter, I'm so sorry. I think my video froze for a second and I lost just about everything you said.
Can you hear me now?
I got you now. I think it's on my
Oh.
end.
I was just going to say, can it be directly attached to the construction of an ADU? Is that a possibility? That if you build an ADU, it can be split off and sold separately? Because ADUs are a nice example of the kind of small footprint homes that we're trying to get out of the
Yeah.
bill. It's 700 square feet usually is the size of the floor plan. I was just curious.
Yeah, and that's where the conversation around utilities is really important too, right? Because I mean, a lot of those ADUs will necessarily tap into water and sewer from the existing home on the property. There are some party wall agreements that we're looking at to be able to solve for some of those issues. But I mean, Peter, it's a good point, and I haven't looked at it from that framework or from that lens yet, but I would say that is exactly the type of home that we're targeting, or at least hoping to bring to fruition a little more readily.
There was a question in the chat. As a mobile home tenant advocate, are there any other policies in the works around I think around mobile home parks
Oh,
and
hey Drew,
tenants?
how are you? Yeah, good. So yes, I'll have a bill that is I'm going to call it a cleanup bill, but 1157 was my water quality and mobile home parks bill from a couple of years back. We are going to work on some of the enforcement mechanisms in that bill. There's some ambiguity that's leading to, I think, outcomes that are less favorable than we had intended because of need for clarity between CDPHE's jurisdiction and DOLA's jurisdiction through the Mobile Home Park Oversight Program. And so we'll clarify some of those things. I will say that some of the other issues that I'm aware of, I don't know if it comes forward this year as a bill or not. Of course, we need to do more to extend the timeline on the opportunity to purchase. When I ran 1287 in 2022, we had bumped it out to 180 days from 90 days at the time. We were able to get 120 days signed into law. We know that's still a really tough timeline to be able to organize a multi-million-dollar transaction with neighbors who you may or may not know well. We've had issues around bundled park sales come up where, it'll be a multi-park sale. Some of those properties might even be out of state, and it's really difficult for residents to understand what their individual park might be selling for and how they exercise their opportunity to purchase right in the state of Colorado when their park is perhaps bundled in with others. We had an odd situation where a mobile home park was potentially going to be put up for auction, which makes it really difficult to then figure out the process on the back end of that auction by which residents could exercise their opportunity to purchase rights under law. I think, obviously there's still concerns around lot rent. That remains a huge concern. Other things that I'm looking at, I don't think they're bills this year, but it would be, I think, really important to look at ways that you could allow for an existing homeowner in a mobile home park to bring in a new unit of comparable size. That is not a right that folks have at present. And I think that would be something that'd be really important, especially where you have residents who are looking for that stability, energy efficiency. Accessory dwelling units inside of mobile home parks are another very interesting conversation to have, not as a separate unit, but as a separate entrance to an existing mobile home. They are building those at present. I would love to see something along those lines. And then certainly last but not least, I think, there's continued issues around evictions and tenant protections in this space that we need to work on. There's more to be done for sure. Whether or not that's this year or next year, I'm more inclined to say next year, but I'm always collecting feedback, Drew. So if you've got ideas or if you're hearing issues, please send them our way. We'll try to do our best.
Okay, other questions? I think we're close to our hour. Rep Basenecker, thank you. I think Senator Heinrichsen jumped off, but if you see him, tell him thank you. Any final words or advice on how to best advocate in this space or this session even? Leave you with the final word. Thanks for being here.
Well, Matthew, thank you. I would just say, as much as you are able, as much as you are willing to certainly reach out to your legislator or legislators on committees that are taking pivotal votes on these policies, it's really important. There is always the need for a counterpoint, and that counterpoint that I think you all provide is that housing is something we desperately need. Housing is something that is tied to our economic future as a state, and housing is something that we can do well, but we have to take a look at existing processes and laws to be able to reimagine what it looks like in Colorado. And so please, as much as you're able, show up in committee, offer some testimony, contact your legislators, and thank them for being so pro-housing, because I know that's what you expect them to be. And I think together we can really build coalitions that get these things done. So really appreciate the question, Matthew.